Hey ladies, Jen here, and I am the host of this lovely community of women, energized women. That's a few too many women's there. Today's topic is don't make assumptions, and that is basically the third of the 4 agreements in Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The 4 Agreements, which I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. So in order to put this into perspective for you, have you ever, again, this is probably a bit of a rhetorical question because I'm sure everyone can relate to this, but have you ever had an argument or a disagreement, misunderstanding with a partner or a loved one, family member, good friend, where after the initial heat, I suppose for want of a better word, heat of the argument has died down and you're both calmly talking about what happened? Have you ever come across one or both of you say, well, I didn't mean it like that? So if that has ever happened to you, basically right there is where an assumption has been made. So the minute somebody says, I didn't mean it like that, it means the other person has basically made an assumption about what the speaker did say, and the assumption was incorrect because they didn't mean it like that. So an example of this from my life was actually just happened this morning, funnily enough. And it wasn't an argument, it was just I felt myself reacting to the situation and I realised what was going on. So an example just to explain this a bit further. This morning I got up, went outside into the backyard and started watering some of my plants. And I could hear him saying from the kitchen, oh, it's going to rain today, you know. Now, in that moment, I assumed that he was saying that about it was going to rain because he thought I was using too much water or I was watering the garden too much. So I kind of felt my defenses going up a bit because I thought, oh, what doesn't he like how much I water the garden? So that was my initial automatic reaction in that moment. But after asking him a couple of questions or taking the conversation a bit further, what I realized is that he was actually just trying to be helpful. He didn't know if I knew that the weather forecast was rain, and he knows that I don't like waste, whether it be water, whether it be food, whether it be whatever. I have this issue with waste. So he was simply trying to be helpful and letting me know that it might rain today and that in that case maybe I might not want to water the garden. So that's a really, oh geez, Buddy. Sorry, that was Buddy, just scared me. So that's quite a small but classic example of assumptions at work and how easy it is for them to happen. And I'm sure you can think of hundreds of examples that are much more serious than that and potentially lead to almost World War III between you and your partner or you and your loved ones. So if you can relate to that, so if you've ever had one of these situations where the comments made, oh, I didn't mean it like that, then please comment, I didn't mean it like that, in the video here. So hi Heidi, how you going? I'm going to see if I can wave at you. This is giving me a bit of a message. All right, got a bit distracted there, so back to it. So where does this come from? Because it happens all the time. We all make assumptions. And the thing I want to, I suppose, preface this whole topic with is that it's completely natural for us to make assumptions. So what's actually happening at a brain level, the human brain is extremely lazy. The reason it's lazy is because it actually takes a lot of energy for our brain to operate. In fact, 25% of everything we eat or the energy that we ingest is used by our brain. So as a survival mechanism, our brain takes every opportunity to save energy. And that's why I always talk about lazy brain, because our brain's always doing things to save energy. The way it works in this situation is our brain actually operates on a bunch of frames. So if you think about a picture frame, now these frames are developed over our lifetime, and the way it works, or the best way to think about it, is if you think of a picture frame, every time we're faced with a situation in life, our brain will throw us a picture frame and we view that picture through that frame. Now, depending what that frame is, that's where the assumptions come from. Now, in terms of frames and how they work, that's a whole different topic. So I'm not going to go into that today, but I just want to kind of use that to demonstrate why we make assumptions. So in that example that I talked about with Woz this morning, when he made the comment about, you know, it's going to rain today, the frame that popped up for me was, oh, he doesn't like what I'm doing, or oh, he thinks I'm watering the garden too much. So it was this, my interpretation or my frame that I put around that situation that then caused the misunderstanding. So the challenge with that is the frames that pop up for us basically are assumptions, and we then act on those assumptions as opposed to what the other person is actually saying or is actually meaning. So we're behaving based on our interpretation of the situation, not necessarily on the facts of the situation. So you can see how that can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. And I would argue that the fact that the human brain has this inbuilt programming that makes assumptions about everything, I would argue that that is what leads to 99% of all misunderstandings between humans. Because if you think about it, if these assumptions did not occur, then misunderstandings would be less likely to occur, and there would be less arguments and less conflict between us and our loved ones. So knowing how bad assumptions can be and the significant challenges, arguments, fights that can come from making assumptions, what can we do about it? How do we rectify it? Well, that's easy. Don't make assumptions. Just kidding. Well, that is the solution, but it's easier said than done, right? Because it's an automatic process that happens within split seconds in our brain. So it's not as easy as saying, oh, well, I'm never going to make assumptions ever again. So what are some things that we can do to help? I'll preface this with saying it's not necessarily going to be easy. It takes practice, and we're always got to be kind of on the ball and aware that these assumptions could be coming into play. So I've got a couple of ideas for you. First of all, try to take on a more curious nature in all communications with others. So the best way to do that is just ask more questions. When you feel yourself reacting, so it's also becoming a lot more self-aware. So when you feel that kind of reaction coming up in yourself, whether it be you're getting defensive, you're getting angry, you're feeling hurt, that right there is a signal that you're making assumptions about what the other person is saying or meaning by their words or their behavior. So in that moment, the minute you notice that reaction coming up in yourself, use that as a trigger to ask a question as opposed to make a statement, because it's that next thing that comes out of your mouth that's going to, I suppose, drive the direction of the conversation, and it's potentially going to go down the path of a misunderstanding and potentially an argument, or it's going to allow you to fix the situation or understand properly what the other person is trying to say. So asking questions is really key, and that self-awareness so that you can stop yourself from reacting and verbalizing that reaction and ask a question instead. And another, I suppose, little tip is to try and slow everything down. Most misunderstandings and arguments often come because we just react. So we react, we speak, and before we know it, there's this tit for tat going on, and the misunderstanding is at the base of it, but we've kind of gone too far because we've already reacted. So if you can slow down and think before you speak, that's going to be really helpful as well. And the other thing is, again, along the lines of the self-awareness, try to catch yourself in the assumption. So try to catch yourself in that moment where somebody said something to you and you've decided what they mean. So you've jumped to a conclusion, you've reacted some way. Try and catch yourself in that moment. And again, questions are your friend, because if you can ask a question, that's going to be the moment that potentially changes the outcome of that interaction. So I've got a bit of a challenge for you to help put this stuff into practice. So think about the last argument that you had with someone. I suppose the bigger the argument, the more hurtful and huge it is, probably the easiest this activity would be. So think about the last argument you had with a loved one and write down the answers to the following questions. Did you feel misunderstood at any time during that argument? And if so, what might the other person have assumed about what you were saying or what you were meaning? So write that down. Did you jump to any conclusions about what the other person was saying or meaning? So what assumptions, identify what assumptions you made during that interaction. Did anybody during that argument or after the argument, maybe when everybody was calm, did anyone say, I didn't mean it like that, or words to that effect? If so, identify the assumptions made that would have led to that statement. So what was assumed that led to that misunderstanding? Lastly, what questions could they or you have asked in that situation to avoid the assumptions that were made and then the subsequent argument? So that's just a bit of a challenge to help you start to kind of really see how often assumptions occur and the significant impact they can have in terms of a breakdown in communication and sometimes serious arguments as a result. But the real challenge is getting into the habit of asking questions as you go, asking questions in the moment so that we can avoid those misunderstandings. That's pretty much it for today. I would love to hear about any misunderstandings that you have had with people where you know that assumptions were pretty much 100% to blame. I'd also love to hear about any times where you implement these ideas in the next week or two and it's actually worked. So you implement the asking questions, slowing things down, stopping the reaction. So I'd love to hear where it worked to perhaps diffuse an argument or avoid a misunderstanding occurring. Thank you for watching if you're watching live. Thank you for watching this far if you're watching the recording. That's pretty much it for me. Have a great rest of the week and I will see you next week, same time, same place, and we'll be doing the fourth of the 4 agreements, which is always do your best. Have a great one. See you soon.